Shalom to everyone who is watching this video. A few years ago, I made a video called The Government's Black Hebrew Israelites, which was recently deleted by YouTube. So I will reiterate some of the things that I said in that video here, as well as incorporate additional information. The man whose picture you see on the screen is named Wentworth Arthur Matthew, who was purportedly born in the West Indies in 1892 and died in 1973. In 1919, he started a congregation that was initially called the Commandment Keepers Church of the Living God, the Pillar and the Ground of the Truth and the Faith of Jesus Christ, which later just became known as the Commandment Keepers. He also had a FreeMasonic lodge called the Royal Order of Ethiopian Hebrews, the Sons and Daughters of Culture, which dabbled in the teachings of the Kabbalah. The man you see on the screen is a man named Eber Ben Yamin, also known as Abba Bivens. He was a part of the Commandment Keepers congregation that I just mentioned, and he left their congregation and started what eventually became known as the ISUPK, which stands for Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, in 1969. They're also known as One West because their congregation was located on One West 125th Street in Harlem, New York. Let's check out the following video of the late Chief Naphtali, who was an associate and a peer of Eber Yamin, also known as Abba Bivens. And let's listen to him speak on the derivation of the so-called 12 tribes chart.
Our elder and our teacher, and he stand up there and he start talking and say, and I can prove it with that book you got right there in your hand, and anyway, that was a great.
And he's referring to so-called Abba Bivens when he's referring to the man that's talking.
Experience. I went up there a couple times. One time we were over there and they had the charts up, and they had the charts that said if you're Jamaican you come from this tribe, and if you're from Barbados it's that tribe, and boom, 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 boom. And read the book, said, hey, come on, Pop. What is, you know that ain't right. He said, of course, Danny, I know that's not right. He said, but that's the hook. That's how we get them into place, and we wire them up to what's true.
So when the man said, come on, Pop, you know that's not right, he was referring to Abba Bivens, Eber Ben Yamin. That's one of his monikers, Pop. He said, you know that's not right. And he said, of course I know that's not right, but that's the hook.
One time we were over there and they had the charts up, and they had the charts that said if you're Jamaican you come from this tribe, and if you're from Barbados it's that tribe, and boom, 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 boom. And read the book, said, hey, come on, Pop. What is, you know that ain't right. He said, of course, Danny, I know that's not right. He said, but that's the hook. That's how we get them into place, and we wire them up to what's true.
This is the true derivation of the so-called 12 tribes chart. And as it says in Colossians chapter 3, verse 9, and Leviticus chapter 19, verse 11, the saints are supposed to lie not one to another. So the derivation, the origination of the 12 tribes chart started with a lie, and it continues in a lie today.
well, years later after he passed away, and his sons and all of them, they either died or moved away, the Tanakh school began to teach those things as truth. This is the truth, and well.
As he just said, they continue teaching this doctrine as the so-called truth. And that's why many people today who are in the knowledge of who Israel is and the fact that the commandments are not done away with, say that we are in the truth. It comes from that. When in reality, as I mentioned before, the truth is what Christ said in John 17, verse 17, where it says, sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. He was praying to his Father. The Father's word is the truth. And that includes the law and the commandments. As it says in Psalm 119, verse 142, thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth.
One time we were over there, and they had the charts up. And they had the charts that said, if you're Jamaican, you come from this tribe, and if you're from Barbados, it's that tribe, and boom, 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 boom.
Again, this is why people still to this day believe in the 12 tribes chart. When even if you just know the basics of genetics, you would know that as the children of Israel, we are not genetically related to these other nations of people that are included on the 12 tribes chart. Most of us are E1B1A in haplogroup, or what's also called EM2, or if not, we would cluster autosomally with E1B1A people because we are predominantly of the same genetic lineage. People who say that Native Americans are the tribe of Gad or that Mexicans are Issachar, they're getting this from One West, from the 12 tribes chart, whether they know it or not. When people say that all white people descend from Esau, this is One West doctrine. Now, many people don't even know that they get this from One West because they learned it from someone else, who themselves learned it from someone else, who themselves got it from someone else who learned from One West. That's why many don't even know that the doctrine comes from One West. Christ not being born of a virgin, for example, is another thing that they believe, which I plan to cover soon, maybe in a series of videos. It's also common among them to believe that other nationalities of people can't be saved or can't enter the kingdom. This is why on the ISUPK official website, they say here, the ISUPK is the original organization that the Most High and Christ bestowed the truth upon. Every other Hebrew Israelite group you see are offshoots from the original ISUPK, which started at 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York in 1969. The home of the truth. That's why they're able to say that, because all of the One West groups splintered from ISUPK originally. It's not true that every Israelite, so-called Hebrew Israelite group came or descended from One West, but it is true that the majority of the groups most of you know of did. Most of the so-called camps did. In this graphic here that someone created, I didn't create this, but you see Abba Bivens at the top. It says he was a former member of the Commandment Keepers and started the Israelite school. And then it makes its way down to some of the leaders of some of the congregations or so-called camps that are prevalent amongst the so-called Hebrew Israelites today. And this isn't about singling out any particular group, but this is just to give you an understanding of where many of these doctrines come from. And as I already mentioned, someone doesn't have to be a member of a camp for their doctrines to have derived from the camps. The knowledge that the biblical Israelites were and are so-called black people did not start with the camps, did not start with One West, did not start with Arthur Wentworth. For an example, I actually have a whole video that goes into that, which should be popping up on the screen now, but just to show you a little bit of information here at jewishvirtuallibrary.org, which is a well-respected website about so-called Jewish history. It says here that the decline, I'm not going to read the whole article, but it says here that the decline of the Jewish communities of West Africa can be traced to the arrival of Muslim invaders in the 14th and 15th centuries. So there were so-called Jewish communities in West Africa. And it says here that their decline can be traced to the arrival of Muslim invaders, which means the Muslims came in and attacked and oppressed the Israelites. Those were the so-called Jewish communities in West Africa. It says North and West African Jews banded with other local communities of Berbers, Christians, and Greeks to ward off the invaders, but eventually succumbed. Many were forced to convert to Islam, sold into slavery, or simply massacred. And this is why a lot of Israelites ended up being Muslims even before coming over in the transatlantic slave trade. It says, in the face of this persecution, written traditions such as the Torah were lost. The Eber Ben Yamin, though having no written evidence of their Jewish heritage, maintained a strong oral tradition and practiced many Jewish customs in secret. Records of these medieval Jewish communities found in the Timbuktu Mali Islamic Library indicate the presence of Jewish families in the region before the arrival of Islam in the 1300s Common Era. There were so-called Black Jews in West Africa before the transatlantic slave trade. This is talking about the so-called Igbo tribe. As it says here, in modern-day Nigeria, the Eber Ben Yamin practice a number of customs born of Jewish tradition. Males are circumcised on their 8th day of life. Women are separated during their menstrual cycles. The crossbreeding of plants and animals is forbidden, as is the consumption of non-kosher animals. Even Yom Kippur and Sukkot are celebrated. There has been a resurgence of Jewish learning among the Eber Ben Yamin. There are currently 26 Eber and non-Eber synagogues in Nigeria, and Hebrew and Torah study have increased as well. The Eber have long known about their Hebraic ancestry. And again, this is a reputable so-called Jewish website. This is no Hebrew Israelite website. As it says here, it says Rabbi Howard Gorin made several visits to Nigeria starting in 2003 after he was invited by a leader of the Nigerian Jewish community, and he observed that many Igbo consider themselves ethnically Jewish, but practice Christianity, what is known as Messianic Judaism. And they're going to use words like Jewish, they're going to use words like Judaism, because we know that these words carry a connotation pertaining to the so-called Jews, or those who people know as Jewish today. So they blend it all together. But the reality is that the Igbo consider themselves Israelites. Real genetic blood Israelites, not a part of a religion or converts to a religion per se. It says there are also some Yoruba who claim to have Jewish roots. Again, Hebrew roots, Israelite roots. But amongst the Hausa, this is not a common occurrence. And the Yoruba is another so-called tribe that was highly victimized in the transatlantic slave trade. To put it another way, the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade victims, us who are scattered in the Americas, are their descendants. We're the descendants of the Yoruba. We're the descendants of the Igbo. The Igbo and the Yoruba are the same people genetically. What I just read to you just showed you that in West Africa, before the transatlantic slave trade, there were black people in West Africa who considered themselves Israelites, or some would say Jews, who kept the customs of the Torah, the laws. That's what we just read, and even leading up to today. But of course, in today's time, they are being infiltrated and influenced by the powers that be, as we all are. But as it says here, and this is the autobiography of a man named Ola Uda Equiano, who was a victim of the transatlantic slave trade. He was captured in West Africa and brought over to the Americas. He says, fortunately, this man soon became very much attached to me and took very great pains to instruct me in many things. He says he taught me to shave and dress hair a little, and also to read in the Bible, explaining many passages to me, which I did not comprehend. I was wonderfully surprised, listen to this, to see the laws and rules of my country written almost exactly here. Did you see that? It says a circumstance which I believe tended to impress our manners and customs more deeply on my memory. In other words, when he read the Torah, he said, hey, we did this when I was in West Africa. Remember, he was captured as a child. He was a child when he was captured and brought over to the America. So when he read the Torah, he said, these are the laws and rules of my country written almost exactly here. And in other places of this autobiography, he goes into more depth about the customs of his country, which are Hebraic customs. And again, he knew this even though he was just a child before he was kidnapped. And there's so much information on this, but just to touch on it again here in the Encyclopedia of the Jewish Diaspora, Origins, Experiences, and Culture, Volume 2. As you see, it says, in later centuries, Jews are believed to have settled in Western Africa during the height of the Songhai, Mali, Ghana, and Kanem-Bornu empires. According to accounts from explorers of the region, several powerful Jewish families of the Songhai Empire were of Jewish origin until Askia Muhammad came to power and in 1492 decreed that all Jews either convert to Islam or leave the region. So again, it was Islam that was one of the primary enemies of the children of Israel and also had a large part in their captivity. A large reason why there is so much intentional confusion being injected into the Bible teachings of the children of Israel is because there are government agents amongst the congregations whose job it is to intentionally cause confusion. Every Black organization that alleges to be dedicated to the improvement and enhancement of the so-called Black race is infiltrated by the government or by government agencies. Because you must remember that those who currently have rulership over us know exactly what Deuteronomy 30 says about what happens when the children of Israel return to the Most High and his laws and commandments. Therefore, it's in their best interest to attempt to delay this from happening as much as possible so that they may maintain their rulership. Many of you have probably already seen the movie that's on the screen, Judas and the Black Messiah. Remember, this is a movie that's based on a true story. It says in 1968, 19-year-old petty criminal William O'Neal is arrested in Chicago after attempting to steal a car while posing as a federal officer. He is approached by FBI Special Agent Roy Mitchell, who offers to have O'Neal's charges dropped if he works undercover for the Bureau. O'Neal is assigned to infiltrate the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party and its leader, Fred Hampton. So again, Fred Hampton is a real person. William O'Neal was a real person. William O'Neal infiltrated, working for the government. He infiltrated the Black Panther Party. This is nothing new. It says O'Neal begins to grow close to Hampton, who works to form alliances with rival gangs and militia bands while extending community outreach through the Black Panther Party's Free Breakfast for Children program. I'm going to skip down a little bit. It says, after Hampton is arrested, talking about Fred Hampton, and imprisoned for allegedly stealing $71 worth of ice cream bars, O'Neal begins to rise through the ranks and is promoted to security captain. So O'Neal, who is the government agent, he rose in the ranks of the Black Panther Party to security captain. That shows you that an agent can be a high-ranking member of a certain organization that's supposed to be about the enhancement of so-called Black people. We're going to listen to this short clip of the informant William O'Neal speak, and he eventually ended up purportedly committing suicide. Again, Fred Hampton was the president or the chairman of the Black Panther Party.
Party leaders Mark Clark and Fred Hampton were killed in the raid. 4 of the 7 surviving occupants of the apartment were wounded. All were charged with assault and attempted murder.
So that's the mother of Fred Hampton's child. Fred Hampton was killed in this raid that they just mentioned.
And I remember walking out of the office and looking through a little clearing over on the next block, which was right in front of the Monroe Street address, and seeing a lot of police cars over there. And at that time, Bobby Rush came to the office. He had just come from over there, or maybe the coroner's office. In any case, we walked back over there, and we both were speechless. We just walked through the house and saw what had taken place and where he died, and it was shocking. And then I just began to realize that the information that I had supplied leading up to that moment had facilitated that raid. I knew that indirectly I had contributed, and I felt it.
No, you contributed directly. You were one of the main individuals who caused that raid to happen and who caused the untimely death at that time of Fred Hampton.
And I felt bad about it. And then I got mad. And then I had to conceal those feelings, which made it worse. I couldn't say anything. I just had to continue to play the role.
Yeah, because you don't want to upset massa. So you better keep your mouth shut and act like you're fine with the fact that you just deceived and facilitated, as you put it, the murder of your brother.
FBI headquarters authorized payment of a $300 bonus to informant William O'Neill for, quote, uniquely valuable services which he rendered over the past several months, unquote.
For $300, that's how much he got paid. That's how they treat niggas who want to be agents, who want to sell out their own people. A lot of these infiltration programs have names, such as COINTELPRO, which most people have heard of.
Counterintelligence program which targeted many civil rights groups, such as the Black Panthers and the American Indian Movement, and activists like Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X for more than a decade. The purpose was to, quote, expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, and otherwise neutralize the possible threats.
And that's what they do. Disrupt, expose, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize. That's why they have their agents teaching doctrines that are weird and that are inherently false. That's why they curse people out and tell people that they're the devil and that they can't make it into the kingdom because it's only for Israelites, things of that nature. That's why they do that. They're discrediting the so-called movement. They're misdirecting. They're misrepresenting.
Against the existing order. The program was exposed in 1971 when a group of activists stole documents from an FBI office on the night of the Muhammad Ali-Joe Frazier fight.
1970.
So here we're about to listen to another agent explain how he infiltrated black groups. And the name of the program he worked under was called Black Desk.
I interviewed a man who worked as an informer for the FBI during the 1960s. His name is Darthard Perry, also known as Ed Riggs, also known as Bill Perry, also known as Othello. How were you paid?
The pay was always in cash. Cash, and you would sign a card.
Did you ever suffer pangs of conscience?
Quite a few times. Quite a few times. I still suffer pangs of conscience.
You should suffer pangs of conscience because what you did was morally wrong. And that's what happens when you do something that is wrong and you know it's wrong. You know it's a violation of your conscience. You should feel bad about it.
I suffer from the fact that a lot of people trusted me and I misused that trust. I suffer from the fact that a lot of information that I gave out was the undoing of certain groups or certain people.
Why have you decided to talk to me?
And this is why you should do your best to always have a conscience that's clear toward the Most High. Because, again, when you do wrong and you know that it's wrong, not only will you suffer pangs of conscience, but you're going to be judged for those things that you're doing wrong that you know are wrong when all is said and done. So it's best to have foresight and to identify when something is a violation. That way you can purposefully not do it.
For the simple reason, I think this information should be getting out, should be put out to the public. I think not only black people, but everyone should become aware of what your so-called law enforcement agencies do to so-called enforce the law. because between you, myself, and the audience, I've seen more felons in law enforcement than I have in prison. They have a file.
Oh yeah, the biggest criminals, as they say, the biggest gang is the government. That's for sure.
On every type of magazine that blacks read, they have a file on the music, dance, theater, actors, comedians, you name it, man.
And they would actually study these different...
Oh yes, definitely.
What would they do with music?
So they have a file pretty much on everything that black people are doing so that they can study you, understand you, and know how to keep you debased and keep you in the position that they want you in. And if they did this back then, imagine what they're doing now.
To understand the people, you have to understand the culture. To infiltrate, you have to understand. You had a lot of so-called white liberals that were infiltrating the so-called black groups using the information that they had gathered from the studies of blacks.
Yep, so what they'll do is they'll study the so-called Hebrew Israelite movement. They'll have an understanding of some of the history, even probably better than many of you. And then they'll go ahead and come in and disseminate that information so that they can appear to be someone who is, on your side, someone who is who has the same interests in mind that you have, who sincerely wants to follow the Most High. That's what they'll do. That way they can go ahead and spread their false information. They can go ahead and report back to whoever they're reporting back to. They can go ahead and, discredit certain things or misrepresent certain things.
You mean just to understand the behavior pattern of our people?
Oh yeah, I can, Will Heaton could name out some jams of Miles Davis that I hadn't even heard of. He could name off some books that I hadn't even read pertaining to black culture.
Do you ever see agents actually studying the music of...
Yes. I've seen them going over even video portion of cultural events. The understanding, like when, you have an organization like Leroy Jones' Black House. You remember that? Okay, Leroy Jones's place, which was done on the thing of tribalism. That's where I first heard the word Kintu, Mantu, Hantu, Hentu. These words of the African continuum. I learned that from an agent. He ran it down to me. They make in-depth studies of the personalities of the people they're dealing with too, culturally.
Exactly. So they have a great understanding of your mindset. They have a great understanding of your doctrine. So they can fit in with you and you wouldn't suspect a thing.
It always helps when it's the thing of you can take their culture and use it against them.
How large would you say an extensive collection on our culture would you say the FBI has? Would you rate it as large as a particular library, like the Schomburg Library in Harlem? Or...
I would rate it better. And the fact is that they go into details that we probably would overlook.
They go into details, and they probably have files or information on specific individuals as well. If there's a popular YouTuber, or even in some cases someone that's a relatively smaller YouTuber, for whatever reason, they might feel it's necessary to monitor that person. They might feel that it's necessary to keep tabs on that person and what they're doing, what they're telling other people, etc. This is how these people operate. These people leave no stones unturned.
Will Heaton used to meet me in different places, Will Heaton. That was one of my supervising agents. There is a certain bar in the Los Angeles area where people into black cultural things met, and Will Heaton used to meet me there. And he would go into very long and tiring conversations with some very articulate brothers about culture, African culture, and Afro-American culture.
Tell me about some of the cultural organizations that you infiltrated and what you did.
PASLA, Mafunde, Watts Writers Workshop, which they have.
The Watts Writers Workshop?
Yes. Watts Writers Workshop, which was one of the oldest established black writers workshop.
That place was burned down.
Yeah. The Bureau had it burnt down.
How do you know that?
I know because I participated. I did the arson.
You burned down the Watts Writers?
Yes.
Would you...
So he said he burned down the Watts Writers Workshop because the FBI had it burned down. And a lot of things that happen in the news, a lot of things that happen that are considered terrorist attacks, things of this nature, it's the government doing it. Of course, they're not going to let you know that, but they're doing it and they have their own reasons why they're doing it. I made videos previously about the so-called Black Hebrew Israelite terrorist attack. Before they did it, I knew they were going to do it because this is how they operate.
Say to American citizens that this situation of surveillance and infiltration continues to this day?
Oh, yes.
On the dimension that you experienced?
Probably much larger by now.
Much larger by now. This is 2022. They are leaps and bounds more advanced.
Larger.
Oh, yeah. Let me put it to you like this. Each year, everything gradually escalated up more and more. So I figured when I left, it didn't stop escalating. People always they're talking about COINTEL now so heavily. I'm not talking about COINTEL. I'm talking about a thing called BD, which was better known as Black Desk. The Black Desk was set up for a simple thing of infiltrating black organizations and black groups, whatever.
Where was this Black Desk, or were there a number of them?
There were a number of Black Desks, but the head Black Desk was in Washington, D.C., controlled by Sullivan. And
Was he black?
No.
Mm-hmm. And what was the function of the Black Desks all over the country? I guess there were dozens.
The function of the Black Desk was to monitor activity, social unrest, revolutionary groups, cultural groups, and such in the black community.
And feed it into this central desk. And it still exists?
As far as I know, yes.
Now, if you didn't understand this video, maybe you found it complicated, maybe you found it confusing, what you do need to understand is this. There's something called the Akashic Records or the Etheric Records, which is the way that those who follow the Babylonian mystery school system explain and repackage the fact that everything that you do and everything that you think is being recorded. As it says here in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13 and 14, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. This is why you are on this earth at the end of the day. It says, for God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Every secret thing that you've done and that you do shall be brought to the light. Again, this is why fearing the Most High and keeping his commandments is your whole duty. Life is a test, and how you complete the test, whatever grade you get, that's going to determine how you spend eternity. It says here in Revelation chapter 20, verse 12, and I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And what are these books? These are the books that record what you've done in your life. It says, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works, according to what they have done while they're in their bodies. Again, that's why it's so imperative that you fear the Most High and keep his commandments, his law, to the best of your ability. Here in Exodus chapter 32, this is Moses speaking to the Most High. He says, yet now, if thou wilt forgive their sin, and if not, speaking about the children of Israel, he said, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written. And the book he's talking about is the book of life. And it says, and the Lord said, whosoever hath sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. That's how you get blotted out of the book of life. The book of life records those who are going to be in the kingdom. And if you're not going to be in the kingdom, if you don't make the guest list, you're blotted out of the book and you're not going to enter. That's why it says here in Revelation 3, verse 5, he that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment. So you have to overcome. And I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. Remember, Mashiach or Christ is our mediator. He will confess your name before his Father and before his angels and not blot out your name if you overcome. And how do you overcome? By keeping the faith and the commandments of the Most High through his only begotten Son.